The ship came in wrong, and Dvora Sait knew it was wrong from the seawall before she could have said why, which was the part that would keep her awake for the rest of the week. That she had felt it in her body, a full minute before her mind found a single reason. She stood on the Veldport seawall in the grey dawn wind with her clerk beside her and watched the trader Maren's reach work up the channel toward the roads, and everything her eyes reported was ordinary. A mid-sized coastal trader, lantern coast lines, sails set competently, riding a little high the way a ship rides when it has offloaded cargo somewhere down the route. Nothing burning, nothing listing. No signal of distress at her masthead. An ordinary ship on an ordinary tide, one of the 40 that would come into Veldport's great harbor before noon, because Veldport's harbor never closed, and the never closing was the whole city. Dvora Sait was 51, broad and weathered, with iron-gray hair cut short against the wind and a face that 2 decades of harbor weather had turned to tooled leather. And she wore the plain sea-blue coat and brass whistle of the harbormaster of Veldport, which was on paper a middling administrative post and was in practice one of the most consequential jobs in the surviving world, because the person who governed the harbor governed the thing that made 65,000 people rich. And the thing that could, if it ever went wrong, make 65,000 people dead. "What is it?" her clerk asked, because he had learned to watch her face. "She's flying nothing." Manifest came up clean on the fast boat, hides and oil out of the Lantern coast, half offloaded at Sorenthal, coming to us to sell the rest. "Look at her deck," Dvora said. He looked. It took him a moment, because the wrongness was an absence, not a presence, and absences are hard to see. "There's nobody on it," he said slowly. 2, 3 hands at the sheets. On a trader coming into the richest market in the world with cargo to sell. A ship coming into Veldport should have its whole crew on deck, up in the rigging, lining the rails, because coming into the grand market was the best day of any sailor's route, the shore leave, the taverns, the pay. The Maren's reach came up the channel nearly silent, 3 figures working her, the rest of her crew nowhere, and that was the wrongness Dvora's body had read from half a mile before her mind caught up. A ship full of sailors that no one wanted to come up on deck. "Signal her to hold at the outer roads," Dvora said. "She does not come to a berth, and send the harbor surgeon out to me, now before she anchors. I want eyes on that crew before one boot of it touches my keys." The harbor surgeon came back from the Maren's reach 2 hours later with a gray face, and the worst thing a surgeon can bring, which is not bad news but uncertainty. His name was Toller, a careful, skeptical man who had been Veldport's harbor surgeon for 15 years and had seen every ordinary shipboard misery there was, the fevers, the fluxes, the scurvy, the rot, and Dvora had chosen him years ago precisely because he did not frighten easily. He was frightened now and trying not to be, and the trying was worse than the fright. 9 of the crew are down, he said, of 22. 3 dead, buried at sea on the run-up from Sorenthal, which is why she's flying nothing. The captain didn't want to be turned away from the market, so he ran quiet and hoped it would burn out before he made port. Toller wiped his mouth. "It hasn't burned out." "What is it?" "That's what I can't tell you." And there it was, the uncertainty laid on the table between them. "Fever hard and fast. Some of them have the marks, dark spots here at the throat and the wrists. Some of them don't. It's moving through the crew quick, which frightens me because quick means it passes easy. But Dvora," he held up a hand before she could speak, "it might be nothing that leaves the ship. Bad water in a fouled cask can do most of this and go nowhere once you're off the ship. Spoiled provisions, a bad hold, a poison in the oil they were carrying. I have seen a whole crew go down and 3 die off a single rotten water butt and not one soul ashore take sick. It might be that, it might be exactly that." "Or," Dvora said. "Or it's a fever that passes person to person," Toller said quietly. "And it's already been on that ship for 2 weeks, and it stopped at Sorenthal 3 days ago and offloaded half a hold, and however many sailors went ashore for a night, and it is now a day's sail from the most crowded market in the surviving world, where 65,000 people live packed into a harbor city, and 40 ships a day come and go to every port that matters. If it's that harbormaster and it gets into the grand market, it doesn't stay in Veldport. Veldport is where the whole world's ships touch. It goes everywhere. From here, it goes everywhere." "And you can't tell me which," Dvora said. "Bad cask or plague, nothing or everything." "Not yet," said Toller. "Maybe not for days. Maybe not until people ashore start dying, which is the one way of finding out I'd give my hands to avoid. I'm sorry, I know what you're asking me for. You want me to tell you it's safe or tell you it's death, and I can't because I don't know, and any surgeon who'd tell you he knows on what I've seen is lying to you." Dvora Sait stood on her seawall and looked at the ordinary-looking ship at the outer roads and understood the exact shape of the trap she was in, which was the oldest and cruelest shape a decision ever takes. Certain ruin against uncertain catastrophe. Close the harbor, the whole harbor, every ship in and out, and she inflicted a certain, enormous, immediate disaster on a city that lived and breathed by never closing. Leave it open, and she gambled 65,000 lives and the world's against the chance that Toller's bad cask was just a bad cask. There was no safe choice. There was only the choosing. She called the merchant council within the hour, because a decision this size was not the harbor master's to make alone, and discovered, as she had known she would, that the council could not make it either, and would spend its energy instead making sure that whatever went wrong, it went wrong on her name and not theirs. They met in the council hall above the Grand Market, a grand room of widow's aisle marble with tall windows that looked down over the very thing they were deciding about, the market in full morning roar, 10,000 people trading the wealth of the world, the rotating stalls, the offloading crews, the whole vast breathing engine of Veldport's two-century prosperity, spread out below the windows as if to remind everyone in the room exactly what was at stake. Dvora laid it out plain: the wrong ship, the 9 down and 3 dead, the surgeon's honest and useless uncertainty, the choice. And the council, which was made of the city's shrewdest commercial minds, did what shrewd commercial minds do with a decision that could ruin them either way. It calculated, and every calculation lined, and the leaning was the danger. "We cannot close the harbor," said Coriol Vane, who spoke for the largest of the shipping houses, and she said it not as a coward but as a woman doing real arithmetic in real time. "I want to be clear about what closing means, because I don't think a warrior or a surgeon feels it the way a merchant does. Veldport is not a city with a harbor. Veldport is a harbor that grew a city, 40 ships a day. The Grand Market runs on the tide. The rotating stalls are vessels offloading before they sail, and if they can't sail, they can't offload, and if they can't offload, the market dies in 3 days, and it is the market that feeds the city. We do not grow our own food. We buy it daily off the very ships you're proposing to turn away. Close the harbor for a week, and Veldport starves faster than any fever could kill it. Close it for 2, and there is no Veldport, the operator's route to Sarenthal, to the Lantern Coast. Anywhere that's open and neutral, Veldport, the free city, the thing the consortium could never buy, becomes a quarantine plague port that no ship will touch for a decade. We would be killing the city to save it from a bad water-cask. That is a real possibility. The surgeon himself says it's a real possibility." "And if it isn't a water-cask," said the counselor for the smaller traders, a nervous man named Emery Loft, and his fear was as legitimate as her arithmetic, "then we've let a plague into a city of 65,000 to save a week of market fees, and it doesn't stay here, and every port in the world remembers forever that the plague that emptied the coast came out of Veldport's open harbor. Neutrality won't save us from that. Nothing saves you from being the city that killed the world. I say close it now, take the loss, and be the city that was too careful rather than the city that ended everything." And then the third voice, the one Dvora had been waiting for and dreading, smooth and reasonable from the end of the table. The counselor with the quiet consortium sympathies, the one who had spent years arguing that Veldport's stubborn independence was a luxury the city couldn't afford forever. "Or," he said gently, "we do the responsible thing and we ask Sarenthal for help. They have the consortium's resources, physicians, isolation facilities, the organization for exactly this. We invite consortium health officers to manage the situation jointly. It would be prudent, it would be humble. And it would, of course, mean acknowledging that the free city cannot manage a true crisis alone, that when it truly matters, Veldport needs the consortium after all." And there it was, Dvora thought, the whole board laid bare. The plague ship was not only a plague ship, it was a lever, and everyone in this room could feel it. To the big houses, it was a threat to the tide that fed them. To the small traders, it was a terror of being blamed for the world. And to the consortium's quiet friends, it was the opportunity of a generation, a crisis frightening enough to make a proud free city invite the very hand it had spent 2 centuries keeping off its throat. Close wrong and the city starved, open wrong and the world died, and do either in a panic, and Veldport's independence, the actual prize, the thing under all of it, went to Sarenthal in the name of prudence. 3 ways to lose, all leaning and the council looking, as councils do, for a name to hang the losing on. "You want me to decide," Dvora said into the leaning room. "All of you. You want the harbor master's authority over the harbor to be exactly total for the length of one impossible morning, so that whatever it cost my name and not the council's. Say it plainly and I'll take it, but say it. I'm too old to be handed a knife and told it's an honor." The council was quiet, and Coriol Vane, who was at least honest, said, "Yes, it's yours, harbor master. The harbor has always been yours. We'll ratify whatever you choose after. That's the arrangement, and you've always known it was the arrangement. I have, Dvora said and stood. Then stop leaning on me and let me go and find the one thing none of you have offered, which is a way to not choose blind. Because Dvora Sait had spent 20 years learning the one thing the council in its panic had forgotten, which was that the choice they'd framed, open or closed now, forever, was a false one, and false choices are almost always a failure of patience. Trap was the word now. Both catastrophes lived in the word now. Close the whole harbor now and starve the city on a maybe. Open it now and gamble the world on a maybe. But the actual danger was not the harbor. The actual danger was one ship, and the uncertainty about one ship, and uncertainty was a thing that could, sometimes, if you were willing to pay for it, be converted into knowledge by the simple, expensive act of waiting in the right way. She did not need to decide whether it was plague. She needed to not let it spread while she found out whether it was plague. Those were different problems, and the second one had a solution, the first one didn't. She went back to Toller and she asked the question the council hadn't. How long, she said, until you'd know, not guess. No, if it's a fever that passes, how long before the ones who are still well on that ship start to fall, and how long before we'd see it jump to anyone who's been near her but not aboard, the fast boat crew, your own hands. 4 days, Toller said slowly, thinking it through. Maybe 5. A passing fever this quick, if it's going to take the well ones, it takes them inside 4 days. And if it's a cask, the well ones stay well because there's no cask left to drink from once they're off it. 4 days of watching tells me almost everything. If nobody new falls in 4 days, not aboard, not the boat crew, not me, it was never passing. It was the ship's own bad luck, and it dies with the ship. Then I don't close the harbor, Dvora said, the shape of it coming clear and hard in her mind, and I don't open that ship. I close that ship, her and only her and everyone who's touched her. It was not a soft answer, and she did not pretend it was. She put the Maren's reach under absolute isolation at the outer roads, no one on, no one off. Harbor guard boats rowing a ring around her day and night with orders to stop any soul who tried to swim for it, which meant condemning the 13 Stillwell sailors aboard to 4 days trapped on a fever ship with the sick and the memory of the buried, because letting them ashore was the one thing she could not risk. She quarantined the fast boat crew who'd taken the first manifest and Toller himself, and everyone who'd been within reach of the ship, into the old plague house on the harbor's edge, built 2 centuries ago for exactly this, and never in living memory used to sit out the 4 days and prove with their own bodies, well or sick, what the ship was. And she kept the harbor open. 40 ships a day, the grand market roaring, the city fed and working and mostly unaware, open, because the danger was fenced at the outer roads, and a fence around one ship was a thing the city could survive, and a wall around the whole harbor was not. The 4 days were the hardest of Dvora Sait's life, because a fence made of nothing but her own authority had to be held, hour by hour, against everyone who wanted it to fall in a different direction. The big houses pushed to open the ship's cargo. The hides and oil were valuable. The isolation was surely excessive. Couldn't the goods at least be offloaded and aired? She refused. Nothing left that ship, not a hide, not a rope, not a rat if she could help it, and she doubled the guard boats when a cargo factor tried to bribe a berth crew into a midnight lift. The small traders pushed the other way, terrified, spreading the word through the market that a plague ship sat at the roads, and Dvora had to walk the grand market herself in her sea blue coat, letting 65,000 people see the harbor master calm and unhurried and unafraid, because a city panics from the top down and the only cure was her own visible steadiness, whatever it cost her to counterfeit it. And the consortium's friend pushed hardest of all, precisely because the isolation was working and buying time, because time was the enemy of his lever. The city is frightened, he told the council, on the second day, with the plague house full and the ship at the roads and no answer yet. The harbor master gambles with a homemade quarantine when Sarenthal offers trained physicians a half-day's sail away. If one soul dies ashore because she was too proud to ask for help, it's on all our heads. Invite the consortium, it's not weakness, it's care. And it was a good argument, and a frightened council very nearly took it, and Dvora had to stand in front of them on the second night and make the case for her own patience against the seductive comfort of someone else's resources. If I open this harbor to consortium health officers, she said, they will do a competent job of the medicine and they will never leave. You know it, I know it. That is how it has always worked. They arrive in your worst hour offering the one thing you're too frightened to refuse, and when the hour passes they're simply there in the harbor, in the health office, in the room, forever, and the free city is free no longer. I am not gambling with the city's safety. I have fenced the danger at the roads, and I am buying, with 13 sailors' hard confinement and my own sleepless nights, the 4 days it takes to know instead of guess. 2 more days. Give me 2 more days before you trade 2 centuries of independence for a fright. If anyone falls ashore, if the fence breaks, I will send for Sarenthal myself and put my name to it. But not yet, not on a maybe. The whole art of this job is refusing to make permanent decisions to soothe temporary fear. They gave her the 2 days, barely, by 4 votes. And Dvora went down to the harbor's edge in the dark and stood outside the plague house where Toller and the others waited and called through the shuttered window to the surgeon she'd condemned to sit inside his own experiment, anyone knew. And Toller's voice came back tired through the shutter. No one knew, not yet. Hold your nerve, harbor master. So far your fence is holding. On the 4th day, the fever on the Maren's reach stopped, and the way it stopped told Dvora Sait everything, and the telling nearly buckled her knees with the size of what she'd been carrying. No one knew fell, not the 13 well sailors trapped aboard 4 hard days in the company of the sick, and not one of them took the fever, not the fast boat crew in the plague house, not Toller, not one soul who had been near the ship but not among its original sick. The 9 who were down had been the 9 who drank longest and deepest from a fouled water tier in the ship's hold. Toller found it on the 3rd day, when the captain finally let him tear the hold apart, a cracked lead cistern that had poisoned the deep water over a fortnight, killing the 3 who'd drunk the worst of it, felling the 9 and touching no one who hadn't put that specific water in their mouths. It was the cask. It had always, in the end, been the cask. It passed to no one because there was nothing in it to pass. The wrongness Dvora had read from the seawall was real. A ship full of dying men is always wrong, but it was the wrongness of bad luck and a cracked cistern, not of plague, and it died at the outer roads exactly as her fence had been built to let it die. She could have opened the harbor to Sarenthal on the first frightened morning and been praised for her prudence. She could have closed the whole harbor and starved the city careful. She had done neither, and it had cost her 4 days of held nerve and 13 innocent men 4 days of terror and confinement they had not deserved. And that was the part Dvora made herself carry honestly, standing on the quay as the survivors of the Maren's reach finally came ashore, thin and haunted and furious at her, and not wrong to be. She had gambled their freedom to protect the cities. She had been right. Being right did not make it free. One of the well sailors, a boy of 19, stopped in front of her and said, 4 days you kept us on that death ship with the bodies. 4 days. And Dvora Sait, who could have explained the whole arithmetic of 65,000 lives, said only, yes, I did, I'm sorry, I'd do it again. Because both halves of that were true, and the boy deserved both. The Grand Market never knew how close it came, which was the whole point, and the measure of the job done right. 65,000 people had gone on trading the wealth of the world for 4 days beside a fenced ship, mostly unaware, entirely unharmed, and the harbor had never closed, and the free city had solved its worst crisis in a generation with its own hands, its own plague house, its own harbor masters held nerve, and had not in its worst hour invited the consortium in. That was the victory that mattered, and only a handful of people in the council hall understood that it was the real one. The consortium's friend had come within 4 council votes and 2 days of walking Sarenthal's physicians into Velport's harbor forever, on the back of an honest fright, and the thing that had stopped him was not courage or luck but patience, an old harbor master's refusal to make a permanent surrender to soothe a temporary fear. Dvora Sait wrote her report that night in the harbor office, with the market's evening murmur coming up through the floor and the Maren's reach already gone, sailed on the morning tide, scrubbed and reprovisioned, her dead mourned, her cracked cistern replaced, an ordinary unlucky trader once more. Dvora wrote it plain, a cracked lead cistern, 9 sick, 3 dead, no contagion, harbor open throughout, danger contained at the outer roads. It did not read like the hardest week of a long life. Good reports never do. The whole art of the harbor was that when it was done right, nothing happened, and nothing happening read as an ordinary week, and the city that had nearly died and nearly surrendered went on trading in the morning without ever knowing which. But she added one line at the end, for the council's permanent record, because she was 51 and would not hold this post forever, and someone after her would face a wrong ship on a gray morning and need to know the thing the 4 days had taught her. The choice is never open or closed. The choice is always whether to decide in fear or decide in knowledge, and the entire skill of this office is buying the time to do the second when every voice in the city is screaming for the first. The next harbor master should know that the plague is rarely the real danger. The panic is the real danger, and the panic is what the city's enemies are actually waiting for. Fence the ship, hold your nerve, do not trade the city's freedom for a fright. She signed it and banked the lamp, and stood a while at the harbor office window looking down at her harbor, the riding lights of 40 ships from every port that mattered, the last stalls of the Grand Market closing under their lanterns, the whole vast open never-closing engine of the free city breathing in the dark, 65,000 people rich and safe and independent for one more week, because an old woman had felt a wrongness from a seawall and had chosen, against every leaning voice, to buy the truth instead of guessing at it. The harbor would stay open. It had stayed open for 2 centuries by never once being closed in a panic, and it would stay open tomorrow, and the danger, when it truly came, as one day, on some gray morning, it truly would find at the seawall whoever held the brass whistle then, and that person, too, would have to choose. Dvora Sait hoped, banking the last lamp, that they would choose the way she had, slowly and afraid, and refusing to the last to let the fear decide.